For this sort of Cartesian materialist will respond that you are reporting on the temporal relations among neural states when answering questions about your subjective states. You are reporting, for example, on the relative timing of neural mechanisms that subserve the visual registration of a blue flash and the neural mechanisms that subserve the registration of the audible bark or the red flash. Before I fill out and respond to this line of reasoning, let's return to Rip, who is about to examine his brain in the vat. Once Rip got up to the vat, he noticed a few odd things. First, there were no printed circuits on the brain. In fact, there were no wires nor anything else but the brain, and the vat wasn't bubbling. He turned to one of the techs and asked, "So how exactly are the signals sent back and forth between my body and brain?" The lab tech looked puzzled and said, "What do you mean? What signals?" Rip said, "Well, the neural transmissions, between my brain and body." The techs looked at each other with further puzzlement. One of them cautiously addressed him. What did they tell you about the procedure?" Rip then recounted the basic idea. Brain removed, stuck in a vat, remained in radio contact, everything recorded to hard drives. The project leader told Rip to sit down. He walked over to his desk, he grabbed a small report and handed it to Rip and suggested that he read. Rip looked down at the report titled Proposal B, Data-Mediated Temporal Displacement. Rip turned the page and began reading. Here's what he learned from the Project B report. I'm now going to summarize that report. Almost immediately after Rip was placed under anesthesia, the lab received a box, apparently sent back in time from the year 3000. There we go. That's the image I want. The box contained two very large capacity hard drives, one labeled Motor Commands to Body, empty. The second labeled Sensory Information from Body, full. The team was asked to use these two hard drives rather than the two they were going to use to record the signals between Rip's body and brain. And since the sensory hard drive was already full, this one right here, there was no need for Rip's body. So that's why I've got Rip here, poor Rip X'd out. There was no need for Rip's body, so the scientific team was asked to dispose of it. So long as the sensory input from the sensory drive was suitable, the sensory input to the brain was suitable, then, as far as Rip's brain was concerned, the situation would be identical to the original plan. The original plan, Rip was here, recall, with arrows, and there was a loop. Okay. The scientists from the future assured the scientists in 2006 that the sensory signals on the sensory hard drive would be appropriate. Rip's brain would be receiving sensory information from a hard drive here, processing it, and sending the outputs that would be recorded to a motor hard drive, just as before. When the data from the sensory hard drive had run out, which would also be when Rip's brain died, they were to take the now full motor hard drive, this one, and stick it in a bunker. In the year 3000, it would be recovered and used to provide motor commands to a clone of Rip's body. So now we're in the year 3000. I'm going to call Rip 3K as the cloned body of Rip minus the brain. The clone body wouldn't have a brain. Instead would have its motor and sensory nerves spliced to transceivers like Rip's body would have been in the year 2006. So in the year 3000, we have the full motor drive, which is now controlling the body, and all the sensory surfaces on the body are filling up the sensory hard drive. Rip 3K, the clone body, would be controlled by the motor commands, and the sensory information from Rip 3K, recorded to the sensory hard drive. This is the sensory information hard drive that would, when full, be sent back in time to the year 2006. The hypothesis was that this should be functionally identical to the situation without temporal displacement. Excuse me. For example, suppose that Rip 3K was tossed a ball exactly 100 seconds after waking from the procedure. there would then be a segment of the sensory data stream recorded to the sensory hard drive to the effect that the ball is approaching. Because of this, when the brain is processing the sensory stream in 2006, exactly 100 seconds after it's brought online, there will be a segment of the data stream caused by the incoming ball. The brain, like any well-functioning brain with that sensory input, will produce motor commands to move the hand to catch it. These commands aren't actually moving a body at this point. Instead, they're recorded to the motor output hard drive on a segment of the data stream that's about 100.5 seconds into the stream. Because of this, in the year 3000, RIP3K will reach its hand out to catch the ball at the right time. In short, because of the capacity to send data back in time, if the inputs and outputs are synced correctly in 2006 and 3000, the setup should be functionally identical to the non-temporal displacement scenario. This does work, by the way. Some people have worried about this, but actually if you can send data back in time, you can sync this. I'll discuss this a little bit more in the final section of the paper. Rip looked at one of the texts and asked, "So it's the year 3000? "Yep." "And this is my brain." Rip pointed to the long dead bulk in the vat. "Yep." "And so every movement I make is because of a motor command being sent from this hard drive." Rip pointed to the hard drive labeled motor commands, full. "Yep." "And everything I'm seeing and feeling, all that information is being recorded onto that hard drive." Rip pointed to the hard drive labeled sensory information, recording. "Yep." Rip had been prepared for the two hard drives. He just assumed that his brain would be between them, processing the sensory information, producing the motor commands. The fact that there was nothing between them, and his brain was long since dead, he found disorienting. He remained seated for a few moments and then finally thought, wait a minute, my brain is between them. It's just that it was between them 1,000 years ago. The same causal loop is there, but the loop has been extended back in time by sending one hard drive back in time. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about temporal self-ascription before discussing this more. So if Rip's brain and all the neural information processing events that underlie his mental events are happening back in the year 2006, then how are we to understand the temporal self-ascriptions? On the view I am defending, the fact that the neural machinery is back in the year 2006 is irrelevant to where Rip is. Rip is located at his point of view, and that point of view is temporally located in the year 3000, because all the perceptual input comes from, and all the behavioral output is manifested by, a body that is located in 3000. Because of this, the contents that are grasped by Rip include locating contents, indexicals and demonstratives that place their subject in the lab in the year 3000. The situation is parallel to the original Dennett case, just a bit harder to swallow. My opponent, the Cartesian materialist, will offer the following as an account of what is happening. The subject is where the brain is, but because the sensory and motor information is coming from somewhere and somewhen else, the brain is being fooled into thinking it is somewhere else and somewhen else. It is like the subject in Evan's submarine, who is temporarily under the illusion of being somewhere different from where he in fact is. And so when Rip was making temporal assessments involving his mental states and flashing bulbs, he was systematically mistaken. He was misaligning two different time series. So this is sort of a summary of what the Cartesian materialist thinks. There was a series of physical events, the bulb flashing blue and red in the year 3000. There was a series of subjective events, the perception of the blue flash, the perception of the red flash, the perception of the bark, and the feeling of the pain. All of these occurred in 2006. Because Rip is under the illusion that he is in 3000, he has misaligned these. And he has judged, for example, that he felt the pain in his tooth after the bulb flashed blue, when in fact his feeling of the pain occurred almost 1,000 years before the bulb flashed. Misaligning these sequences just is what it means to be under the illusion of being at a different time. Similar remarks hold for being under the illusion of being space.